Hello, and welcome to the Pentester Academy webinar. In just a few moments, we will go to Gary Mello from SentinelOne, who will be discussing real-time behavioral AI. Gary brings over 17 years of cybersecurity experience and has previously worked for Proofpoint, McAfee Intel, and Juniper Networks. He now serves as Evangelist, spreading the SentinelOne message to the security industry. If you have any questions during the presentation, please use the raise your hand tool at the bottom of your screen. We will open up a chat window with you to submit your question. All questions will be held until the end of the webinar during our Q&A portion, and we will try to get to as many questions as we can with Gary. Thank you for joining us for this webinar, and it looks like we're ready to start. So let's hand it over to Gary. Hi, Gary. We're all set, so let's begin.
Great. Thank you very much, Andrea, and the rest of the Pentester Academy team. Very excited to be here. So today we want to cover real-time behavioral AI and just a quick agenda of what we're going to cover. For starters, we're going to give just some overview of just the technology itself. Then we'll jump into actually some live demonstrations around this. And then lastly, we'll just do just an overview of the SentinelOne Platform and then Q&A. So let's jump into it. So real-time behavioral AI. So you hear a lot of vendors or companies talk about behavioral AI, but what you don't hear many people talk about is real time. So what behavioral AI is really just monitoring processes and what their activities they're doing and trying to decide whether they're doing malicious behaviors or not. Now where the real time comes in is really where is this analysis happening? So some vendors or technologies need to send the behavioral analysis to their management server or to the cloud to their analysis. I don't view that as real time because you're relying on just another component in that flow. Real time to me means it needs to be done on the endpoint. You might hear the concept of the word autonomous. To me, what that word means is that the solution itself has all the intelligence it needs baked into it to make decisions. It doesn't rely on anything else outside of it. So I'm going to start here, just an overview of what behavior analysis is. So if you're not familiar with it, it's very straightforward. So simply put is anytime a process gets launched, the solution will simply monitor what it's doing. So in this example, a process gets launched and the first thing we notice is, oh, it did a persistence level activity. Maybe it created an auto run registry key or something on those lines. Okay, well that in itself is not bad. Lots of things do that are legit and some things that are bad do it. So now let's build out this story. So now let's say behavior 2, we notice some system manipulations. Maybe it's creating some temporary files, touching sensitive processes and so on. Again, could be malicious, maybe not. We're not quite sure at this point, so let's keep watching. Behavior 3, now we notice some spying. Maybe it's recording keystrokes, something on those lines. But also, legitimate applications record keystrokes. Take, for instance, Slack, right? It's gonna basically give you that chatting function that's gonna record keystrokes as you're doing that. So in itself, you can't convict it at this point. Now at this point, we notice network activity. So we put this whole story together. It started with a persistence level activity, manipulated my system, recorded keystrokes, and now it's phoning out somewhere. At this point, we're pretty sure this is bad if you look at the whole story in the context of this. So in essence, this is what behavioral AI is all about, is really monitoring those processes, every and all processes on the system, look at everything it does behaviorally on the endpoint. And we're going to show this later on in some demonstrations. This is just a high-level, brief understanding of what this is all about. With that said, let's get into some of these demonstrations. So the first one I'm going to run is an attack. It's actually a little older out there, but it still illustrates the example here of behavioral AI. It's leveraging what's called browser autopon. What this does is, if you look here at the bottom here of the steps, is that a victim will go to a malicious URL, typically get social engineered to do that. Once they do that, the attacker is now going to fingerprint that browser and basically find a matching exploit for that browser. Then step 3, once I basically have delivered that exploit, I'm going to basically establish a remote shell. And then in my demo example, once I have that shell, I'm just going to upload ransomware and execute it on the endpoint. So when I run through this demonstration, there's going to be 2 flows. The first flow is more of a traditional EDR flow, more of a reactive security approach, where we're not going to proactively stop this. I'm going to show you basically how behaviorally we detect things, and then after the fact, we respond to it. The second flow will be really showcasing what behavioral AI is all about. We will stop this in its track, more of a proactive security approach. So let's step into it. So you can see here, I'm going to my SentinelOne console, and I just want to point out that my policy is in detect mode. Again, I view this more as I'm in EDR mode, reactive security approach. Now I'm on my victim machine. I'm going to browse to this malicious URL. And when I do that, you can see at the bottom right, we have detected this point, but again, being in detect mode, we're not proactively stopping it. And now look, I just delivered CryptoLocker to this endpoint. This machine has been completely compromised. The wallpaper has changed. I have this nice ransomware note, and all my nice pictures have now been encrypted. So I'm going to go to my SentinelOne console. Let's look at the forensics. So the first thing I see is that it delivered a malicious DLL, and I'm going to quarantine that file. Next, though, we're going to really get into the behavior side of things. I'll notice an exploit attempt here. And when I click on that, you'll start seeing some really good forensics details on this. So one, you just get some forensics or metadata on the machine, its IP, and so on. Which detecting engine, this is an exploit fileless attack. From here, we notice it made a bunch of network connections out to this IP over 443. It made also similar to Germany, Romania, and so on, also over 443. The attack storyline is a visual representation of everything that happened during this attack. These circles or cogs, they represent processes. And this process right here is the actual ransomware process itself. You can see here, it actually impacted a bunch of files here at the endpoint. It actually created a registry key. This happens to be an auto run key along with its path and value, and so on. The other way I could look at this data, if this is easier to digest, it actually happens to be for me, is the raw data report. This is the same data, just more in a text format. So that's that registry key we saw and all those process activities that we saw earlier on. Okay, so again, being on EDR mode, I want to respond to this. I'm going to issue what's called a rollback. What rollback allows me to do is to restore my files back to where they were in a pre-attack state. So I just did that. I'm going back here on my endpoint now. And what you're going to notice here in a moment is that my files are all going to be restored here momentarily. So you can see that CryptoLocker message was just removed. My pictures are now back. I'm going to do a quick log off and log on just to get my nice wallpaper back because it's been cached. All right, so now I'm back up and running. Now let's run this same experiment, but in more of a behavioral AI proactive mode, which we call protect in our solution. So now what you're going to notice, when we run this attack again on the endpoint, as soon as we notice malicious behaviors or activity, we're going to stop this threat in its tracks. Again, this is fully autonomous behavioral AI in real time. So as you can see here, I went to that malicious URL. My browser has basically saying, I can't view this page. And oh, look, my pictures are intact. Going back to the forensics now in comparison, I can see it was automatically killed and quarantined. Next, I can see, again, that same engine we saw before. This is an exploit, a fileless attack. And now if you look at the storyline, in comparison to the last time we ran it, there's only one process. Again, we stopped this in its tracks. And this is really an illustration of behavioral AI. That's, again, analyzing processes in real time. And then as soon as we feel that it is a malicious threshold of malicious activity or behaviors, we'll respond to it instantly on the endpoint at machine speed. I'm going to show you another quick demo here. This one happens to be run on Mac. What this is going to be is basically a phishing attack that I created. So I basically send this social engineer this to my victim. They open this attachment. And I'm just going to run a well-known common backdoor called Eggshell. Just run some commands. Okay, so we're going to do that same flow we just did before, where I'm going to set my policy to that alert mode or detect mode. And again, move that reactive security approach. And now I'm going to go to my endpoint here. And let me start by launching my attack server or my Eggshell server. I really like running Eggshell for demonstrations because it's a Python-based remote access tool. And I can run it all on the same endpoint. So what you're seeing here in the blue is my attacker. And then the victim is also on the same endpoint here. So I'm going to create a payload. And then I'm going to basically start my server. So what I need to do as the hacker is basically get my victim to run that bash command you're seeing here in blue. So I simply just basically am now going to switch hats and I'm going to be the victim. So as a victim, I log into my email. And what you're going to see here in a moment, I have an email from the help desk. Hey, please run the security patch as soon as possible. Looks pretty legit. So let me go and download this attachment and we'll run it. So I have a zip file here. I'm going to open that up. And this is my payload. I'm going to click on this, and you notice I'm getting a prompt here is download from the internet. I'm going to hit open anyway. Top right of the screen, you're noticing that we have detected this point, but we have not proactively stopped it because, again, I'm in that detect mode. So now I'm going to switch hats and be the hacker. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to do an example now that I have a session of maybe some data exfiltration. So I'm going to start by browsing my victim's endpoint, which again is the same endpoint I'm on right now. And I'll notice on the victim's desktop, oh, this file looks interesting, Bitcoin keys. So let me go and download that. You'll notice when I do this command, it's going to be dropped into this data directory. So there we go. So that was an example of data exfiltration. Next thing I might want to do here is maybe take a screenshot of my victim. There we go. Maybe now from here, let's record my victim's microphone. And again, while I'm doing all these things, every one of these actions is being recorded behaviorally. Okay, so now I have a recording of my victim. And then lastly, let's do something around maybe privilege escalation. This is the concept of prompt. So when I do that, it's going to present my end user with this dialogue. They'll put in their password. Hopefully I trick them and do that. And then say they hit cancel here, it's going to keep bothering them with that. So I'm going to put in the word password here, hit OK. And you can see here on my attack server password came up. It's asking me if I want to try for root privilege escalation. I'm not going to do that right now. OK, so from here, let me close out my server, and I'm going to go back to the SentinelOne console. And I'm going to look at this incident. And I'll notice here, this is the incident. And let's not jump into these forensics. So again, some metadata on the machine itself, its IP, machine name, who was logged in. I'm going to bounce this actually off a virus total. You'll see that this was unknown. Another thing I didn't put on the last demonstration is this is seen on network. This is going to tell me every endpoint of my environment I've seen this on. So I have basically everywhere this is in my environment. And then next is which detecting engine. This was an executable behavioral analysis. Then from here, from the forensics, you're going to see, again, these are all the processes that were launched by this attack. The events, if I click on it, come to their process, you'll see all the processes along with their arguments. So that argument there was the malicious bash command that I basically social engineered my victim to run. Again, I could have looked at this in that raw data report format if I would have liked to. All right, so now let's run the same experiment or test. And again, protect mode, like we saw earlier, and more showcasing the real-time behavioral AI functionality. So I'm going to do the same thing here, back to my victim endpoint. Launch my attacker server. Create my payload. And now let's go and run that attack again. And what you'll notice here, as soon as I click on that, that threat has been detected. Going back to my attacker server, let's try to issue some of the commands I did previously. I'm going to do a prompt. And look, the prompt did not come up. And now I'm going to browse the file system, and you'll see all these error messages are coming up. So this attack was, again, stopped in its tracks through real-time behavioral AI. Going over to the SentinelOne console and looking at those forensics, you'll see it was automatically killed and quarantined. And I go back to my storyline, oh, look, I'm only seeing 2 processes. Again, we detect that behaviorally and stop this in its tracks. Okay. So now I'd like to give a little bit of overview of the SentinelOne platform. So what we discussed today is this middle pillar here, behavioral AI. On top of doing behavioral AI, we do static AI. So how that works, when a file is written to disk, we extract over 30,000 characteristics of that file, feed it into our AI algorithms that tries to make a determination whether that file is good or bad. So this is really effective for file-based malware. But when you're talking about things like fileless attacks, live attack scenarios like we showed, there's really nothing to assess statically in most cases, so it's really not going to help you there. So you really need to look at a layered approach or a defense in depth approach, like having a behavioral AI. So that first layer is that static AI, and then from there, we're going to monitor it behaviorally. And then lastly, we add into this automated EDR, like you saw earlier. So being in that higher level of enforcement, we're going to automatically respond to these threats instantly within the platform. A little bit about our differentiation between us and pretty much most people in this space is our management component can be deployed either in the cloud, on-premise, or even hybrid. We're an API-first company. This product was built from the ground up with API in mind. We have over 250 functions. You can actually manage this solution soup to nuts through our API. We also, being the fact that we're on the endpoint, we're uniquely positioned to actually monitor what's happening within SSL traffic and allow you to threat hunt within SSL. Look at a lot of solutions today are on SSL. They require doing things either with certificates or doing such a proxy-based man-in-the-middle type things. We don't require that at all. Being on the endpoint, we're simply just inspecting before encapsulation. We also have cross-platform coverage. We saw Windows and Mac today. We also support Linux. And then lastly, we combine both EPP and EDR. We're actually the first company to do that in a single solution. We just talked about behavioral AI, and then lastly, the rollback functionalities we have. I briefly mentioned our open API functionality. Again, we have over 250 functions. These are some of the integrations we have in place today. But really, the sky is the limit with the fact that our API is so open. And then lastly, just a little wrapping up on SentinelOne, we have over 2,000 customers today. You can see some of our customers here on the left. We've also been tested by a lot of third parties. Most recently, you'll see the NSS Labs. We have the lowest TCO and the highest efficacy rate of everyone they tested. Thank you all for attending. If you'd like to learn more, please reach out to SentinelOne. And I'd like to thank Pentester Academy for having us today. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Gary. Let's see, we did get some questions during the presentation. So why don't we go ahead and jump right into those. So the first question that we have in is, so what do you do, or what does your platform do in regards to pre-execution of attacks or any potential threats?
Yeah, great. Very valid question. There's a few ways we can do that. We mentioned briefly our static AI, but we also leverage things like reputation, cloud reputation, and so on if needed. If we can ideally catch things early on, pretty much when files are written to disk, we're better off. With that said, the fact that we have a behavioral AI component, we don't have to be so aggressive statically. So if we're not quite sure, we have the luxury to rely on our behavioral AI engine, and that's, to be blunt and honest, we're going to catch most of the advanced attacks.
Okay, cool. And then, so what all operating systems are supported?
Yeah, we support Windows, almost current versions of Windows, but also legacy version of Windows, Mac, and also about 8 flavors of Linux today. So very breadth and depth around cross-platform support.
Okay, cool. And one question did just come in. So is the agent kernel-based?
It is. On Windows and Mac, it is. Linux, we are in the user space. That was off customer request. A lot of customers have customized kernels, things on those lines. So actually preferred us to operate not in the kernel space. Outside of that, though, on both Mac and Windows, we are in the kernel space. And that's pretty critical for us on those platforms, just to give us more deeper visibility of what's happening on the endpoint behaviorally.
Okay, cool. Let's see here. What is the current efficiency rate on Windows and Mac OS?
Yeah, we don't actually track that number. I would point you to, if that's of interest, to the NSS Labs report, where they tested us and most of the other major players endpoint space. Really, they take into 2 considerations. One, efficacy and false positive rate, but then secondly, total cost of ownership. What do they think it's going to take to manage the solution? Is it going to basically be a burden on IT organization? And we came out with the best results in the report.
Okay, cool. How many agents are installed on a Windows machine or a Mac?
Yeah, it's one single consolidated agent. So we provide both endpoint protection and automated EDR in one single consolidated agent. Talking with a lot of customers, especially in large enterprises, A big pain point they're experiencing is agent overload. They have a lot of different security agents and other agents need to run. So if we can go in and maybe remove a couple of them, it's definitely a good benefit to a lot of companies.
Okay. Let's see here. Does SentinelOne scan USB keys or external disks as legacy AV?
We don't natively scan. With that said, those types of devices, we can scan a hard drive, not a USB device today. With that said, if there's an executable type file in there, a portable executable, once it gets launched, whether it's resident on the hard disk or that USB drive, that's where we're going to leverage and analyze it behaviorally.
Okay. And then how do you filter any suspicious processes that are running on your system, on your dashboard?
Yeah, that is just through on the dashboard. We have this concept called a filter set, and you can save those and regenerate them after the fact, or even someone else can run it once someone's created it. But it's simply just creating a filter off the criteria. And there's also plenty of other criteria we could filter off of, like a CIDR range of IPs, things on those lines.
Okay, great. I think we have time for just one more question.
Great. Excellent questions, everyone. Thank you.
Yes, and to everybody else who may still have a question, definitely feel free to submit it, and we will try to pass those questions over to Gary, see if he can answer them for you guys later. But yes, okay, so last question. So do you have a multiple tenant console?
Oh, great question. Yes, our most recent release, which we've named Central Park, does support multi-tenancy, and that's very critical for large organizations. They want maybe different departments or even physical sites to have their own single pane of glass. However, it's critical to have just one centralized place for aggregated reporting and management, and we provide all of that.
Okay, great. And I'm going to try to squeeze in one more. So what protections are built into the product to prevent removal of the client?
Yeah, so we have this concept called tamper protection. It does a bunch of things, but primarily, as you ask, it prevents the agent from being uninstalled by the end user. There's a workflow built into the solution that they need to go through an approval to uninstall, but it also protects the agent itself. So it hardens our process, protects the system files, and so on. If you also remember the demonstration we showed in Windows, it protects things like the BSS admin service without a rollback functionality.
Okay, great. And yeah, I'm gonna get one more in here. Sorry, guys. Do you have an ML?
Machine learning, yes, we have multiple machine learning components built into this, both static, behaviorally, and so on.
Okay, great. Well, Gary, thank you so much for joining us today and discussing real-time behavioral AI. If any of the attendees, if you guys still have any questions, like I said, please definitely submit it. Or you can find out more information by going to sentinelone.com or contacting sales@sentinelone.com. Thank you guys so much for joining us, and have a great rest of your day.